The Archbishop of York is facing calls to resign days before he takes temporary charge of the Church of England over his handling of a sexual abuse case. A BBC investigation has found that as Bishop of Chelmsford, Stephen Cottrell let priest David Tudor remain in post despite knowing he'd been barred by the church from being alone with children. Archbishop Cottrell says he didn't have the legal power to sack the priest until a new claim came forward in 2019 when he was suspended. David Tudor didn't respond to our questions. Our religion editor, Ali Maqbool, reports.
In 3 weeks' time, the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, is due to take temporary charge of the Church of England. But we can now reveal a case that raises serious questions about his judgment.
And the children...
It relates to this man, David Tudor, who for 10 years was a priest under Stephen Cottrell, even though since the late 1970s, Tudor had faced allegations of abuse against children.
He abused his position of trust and it's had a huge effect on my life. Having that huge secret pulled me away from my parents. I've lived with shame for 40 years.
Debbie, not her real name, says she was sexually abused by Reverend Tudor between the ages of 13 and 15. Her case and that of 2 other girls went to court in 1988 and he was found guilty of indecent assault and jailed for 6 months. The convictions were later quashed on technical grounds, but subsequently the church found enough evidence to ban him from being a priest, but only for 5 years. By the late 90s, he was back as a vicar on Canvey Island in Essex, and for years moved through the ranks, though the church did say he couldn't be left alone with children. That's where Stephen Cottrell comes in, made Tudor's boss in Chelmsford in 2010.
To share this service with you.
Well, within days of arriving here as Bishop, Stephen Cottrell was told about David Tudor's past and that he was a priest who was banned from being left alone with children. 2 years later, he found out that David Tudor had paid £10,000 to a woman who'd come forward to say he abused her as a child. But then, not only did David Tudor, under Stephen Cottrell, remain in post, he was made honorary canon of Chelmsford Cathedral. Archbishop Cottrell's office says it was a highly unsatisfactory and problematic case and that it was never open to him to revisit or take disciplinary action against David Tudor as there were no live or new complaints that had not already been dealt with. But members of clergy are among those joining with Tudor's victims to call for Archbishop Cottrell to resign.
I think it completely undermines his credibility that this case was not acted on when he knew information at the time. How can you have the moral and ethical authority to lead an institution with that? You can't. So yes, I do think he needs to consider his position.
Only 2 months ago, David Tudor admitted sexual misconduct and was sacked by the church, but he leaves difficult questions for those who for years allowed him to continue as a priest. Ali Maqbool, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Harry Farley joins us now. And Harry, in the last couple of hours, we've had further response from the Archbishop of York.
Yes, we have, and also further response from the Church of England's Deputy Lead Bishop for Safeguarding, Julie Connolty. She says that she knows of other priests currently serving in the Church of England who cannot be left alone with children. They are under temporary measures that mean they can't be alone with children. But as you say, we've also had an updated statement from the Archbishop of York himself. He appears to reject those calls for him to resign. He says that when he became Bishop of Chelmsford in 2010, he was told in detail about the case of David Tudor, and he says that situation was horrible and intolerable. He says that he suspended David Tudor at the first opportunity, 9 years later in 2019, when a new victim came forward and a new police investigation was launched. He says the reason it took 9 years was because there were no legal grounds to take alternative action before then. He goes on to say that he is deeply sorry, and I quote, that we were not able to take action earlier, but that was the situation he inherited. He says it's extremely sorry, he's extremely disappointing that this story is being reported as if an abuser was ignored or even projected. Nothing could be further from the truth, he says, and it actually suggests the framing in that way re-traumatises already hurt people. It's worth saying that, of course, that we've put the details of this story to victims and, of course, the Bishop of Newcastle. She and others say that the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, should have found a way to remove David Tudor from office sooner, and it reflects the crisis in the national church that just weeks after we were talking about the Archbishop of Canterbury having to resign, we're now speaking about his number two, the Archbishop of York, and calls on him to also step down.
Harry, thank you. And you can listen to the full story in File on 4 Investigates on the BBC Sounds app. Police have named a woman who was shot dead outside a church in northwest London on Saturday night. 46-year-old Michelle Sardio died at the scene after a gathering at the River of Life Pentecostal Church in Harlesden. 2 men in their 30s also sustained serious injuries. No arrests have been made. And a 12-year-old girl has been charged with manslaughter after the death of a pensioner in Leicestershire. Bim Coley died in September, a day after being attacked while out walking his dog. The girl, who can't be named because of her age, appeared in court this morning and was released on bail. A 15-year-old boy has previously been charged with Mr. Coley's murder. There'll be an urgent question in the House of Commons today about China's operations within the UK amid claims that Prince Andrew had links with an alleged Chinese spy. Well, in just a moment, we'll speak to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus. But first, our royal correspondent, Sean Coughlin, is at Buckingham Palace. And Sean, this has brought more questions about the Prince's judgment.
Well, that's right. Prince Andrew has stepped down as a working royal, and he stepped back from public life, but he can't seem to step away from these controversies and headlines. Now, Buckingham Palace doesn't speak for Prince Andrew, but it certainly, as I suggest, is embarrassing for them that someone who remains part of the royal family faces these questions about his judgment and also questions about his money. We've heard reports that Prince Andrew might be advised to keep a low profile over Christmas, not to draw attention to himself at events such as the church service at Sandringham on Christmas Day. Although we should say also that Prince Andrew's office has issued a statement saying that any dealings he had with the Chinese businessman known as H6 were entirely not to do with anything sensitive. And also we can say there'll be an update this afternoon, because so far we've been calling this businessman H6, but a judge at the Royal Courts of Justice after this news is going to review whether that anonymity can be lifted and whether we can start using his real name.
Sean, thank you. And Damien, in Westminster, what's going to happen in Parliament today?
Well, a short time ago, we heard that the application for an urgent question relating to this issue had been granted. So the former Conservative leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, who's been a long-time China critic, will ask that question. He wants to know about the extent of Chinese operations in the UK, particularly relating to that arm of the Chinese Communist Party that this individual, H6, is alleged to have been part of. Now, he will initiate that. That may well lead other MPs, such as the former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, who wants to press the government to do more to bring in faster a scheme to register those in the UK who might be acting on behalf of overseas governments, seeking contacts, influence, trying to build influence in the UK. So Keir Starmer has been away in Norway today, and he was asked there about whether he'd had any contacts with the palace about this issue.
In relation to any discussions with Buckingham Palace, there's a long-standing convention in the United Kingdom that's never spoken about. But of course, we are concerned about the challenge that China poses.
Now, what we don't know is if any MPs will try to seek to use parliamentary immunity to try and raise and give the name of the individual H6. That court hearing might be an issue, it means they don't. But more broadly, questions too will be raised about the UK government's outreach to China at the minute.
Thank you, Damien.